good morning, and thank you very much for inviting me. It's my first visit to your country, and I'm so far very impressed. And I think, as you may see in a few minutes of speaking, there are some similarities between Sweden, at least this area of Sweden, and where I come from in the United States, which is Maine. Maine is in the northeast U.S., farthest north state, farthest east state, and it's heavily forested. And using wood for energy has been traditional there for many, many years, for generations. What we're doing now, however, is changing how we use wood for energy. Much more efficient and much cleaner techniques, technology improved. And to be quite honest, we have learned a great deal from our European partners. We are, I would say, perhaps 15 years behind Sweden in terms of understanding the use of wood for energy. In general, renewable, sustainable energy also. But progress is being made, and we have wonderful mentors in our European partners to help us make progress. We have some hurdles politically, as some of you may know. Politically, the U.S. is perhaps going a little backwards right now in terms of renewable energy, but people like myself and some of the people I work with work very hard to advance that political understanding and try to keep things moving in the right direction. So what I'll do this morning is talk a little bit about Maine and bioenergy there. I'll give you some specific data and also talk a little bit about what we're doing in that region, actually in the entire northeastern United States. And by the way, I know there's been a great deal of cross-relationship building with the people of Minnesota. And we also, in the Northeast, have a group called the Northeast Biomass Thermal Working Group, a lot to say. And there's a new group now in the Minnesota area, in the Midwest, doing the same thing. And that group is working specifically to help further our political leaders' understanding of the value of biomass energy. Let me give you just a brief background of myself. You can see on the slide I have several representations. Future Metrics is a company that began some years ago. It's a consulting business. I'm an economist, but I have a long history in energy. In the 1970s, I began in waste energy. Throughout the 1980s, I was in that sector, developing large power plants that were filled with garbage, running district heating systems and generating electricity in the United States. And more recently now, no longer with waste, now with wood. So I work with wood. Future Metrics is very focused on combined heat and power project development these days. The Maine Energy Systems, the second business there, is engaged in pellet boilers, and I'll show you a little bit about that in just a few minutes. And finally, the Biomass Thermal Energy Council is a group that's centered in Washington, D.C., the capital of the United States, and their business is advocacy and education for politicians and their staff. So, why should we care about biomass energy or bioenergy? Is there a laser pointer here? Do this, maybe not. So the time scale here should be 0 to the year 3000. And of course, we're right out here, and this is oil production in billions of barrels per year. So, not even talking about climate change or carbon dioxide emissions, which I'll talk about a little bit further now. We have a problem already because some point, the oil will be gone. And we have to make a transition. Just from an economic point into something different. So this, if you like, we're there. This slide is from the IBED. And essentially what it's showing is the expected change in demand for various fuels by the year 2035. Here we are. Here's the growth in millions of tons of oil equivalent. Right? By the way, China is the darker bar. Notice the developed countries, it would be Europe, the US, and a few others, are reducing their use of, shall we say, dirty fossil fuels, coal and oil. But the rest of the world is not, or is expected to not. So pressures on the global commodities markets, particularly energy products, will increase. And that increase will have several effects. One is economic, of course, price pressure. So the cost of energy is going to increase, but also environmental. These are net carbon emitters, and it's going to be a problem. So one of our challenges is to figure out how to mitigate this problem. We are expected to do our part. Hopefully the US does its part. Europe is certainly doing its part. But a good piece of the world is going to increase their demand and not change emissions. We'll focus a little bit now on some of the US states. And one thing I would like to emphasize this morning is that we are also in our transition, in the northeastern United States particularly, we understand our extreme vulnerability to fluctuations in fuel prices. And this slide illustrates why. This is the petroleum dependency in the US states. And that means what proportion of the total energy demand in the state comes from petroleum, oil, crude oil. This is the median for the United States. And here, Hawaii, of course, Hawaii is off the chart. If anybody has been there, it's an island, and they import a great deal. And Hawaii, by the way, is doing a great deal now to transition off of petroleum. They have a lot of development in wind power and ocean energy. They're doing a lot with ocean energy. But number 2 and 3, and then 4 are New Hampshire, Vermont, and Maine. Those are the 3 most northern and eastern U.S. states. And one of the reasons, the primary reason these 3 states, and the rest of these are the rest of the New England states. New England is a section of the U.S. The reason these states are so petroleum dependent is because they are very heavily reliant on heating oil for home heating. One of the things we work very hard on with education and policymakers is to understand the difference between generating electricity from renewable sources like wind and solar and the need for heat. Most homes, particularly in Maine and New England, do not and will not heat with electric sources. There's a small proportion of heat pumps that are existing, but by and large, because of our very cold climate, Maine is very cold in winter, air exchange heat pumps are not very good. You need ground loop heat pumps. You need to have some kind of heat exchanger with the earth. And that means either trenches or deep wells. And Maine is a very rocky state. It's very expensive to dig in the ground there. A typical well for a typical size household heat pump is $40,000 to $60,000 just for the well installation cost. So heat pumps are not going to be a solution. Therefore, when we talk to policymakers, we have to remind them that generating electricity from renewable resources is a good idea, but it doesn't solve our heating problem. And you notice with the Biomass Thermal Energy Council, we emphasize thermal, or heat. I think it's very important to remind people that heat is probably not, by and large, going to be generated from electricity, particularly for industrial processes. Very important. So this dependency makes these states very vulnerable. Now I know these slides are very full of numbers, and this presentation will be available on the website later, and so you can take a close look at these tables. And also you can please contact me anytime. I'd be happy to share this data at any time with anyone. This chart essentially shows you that probably one of our biggest winter exports in the Northeast is money. We're very good at exporting money because for every gallon of heating oil that's purchased in the Northeast, 76 or 78% of that, of every dollar, leaves the economy. And you had talked about we talked about this when we were driving, how when you use regionally or locally produced renewable energy, you keep the money here in the local economy. This is how much money we export every winter at current heating oil prices. This is approximately what heating oil is in the United States, in the Northeast right now, $3.65 per gallon. Maine exports about $1 billion every year. That's money that leaves and never comes back. The entire Northeast exports $16.5 billion every year. That's money that could stay in the economy if we produce our own heating fuels. This is just home heating. This is not transportation. This is not industrial processes. This is just home heating. And you can see, Maine is in a very large state. Just about 80% of Maine homes use heating oil. And there are a little over 550,000 homes in Maine. Not a very big state. Well, it's a big state, but not very many people. It's an empty. So to export $1 billion a year, 450,000 or 460,000 people is a huge impact. And this slide shows you the impact in terms of jobs. And I call it permanent job destruction. If heating oil were to rise from its current, well, from 275 to 450, this is where it was a few years ago. And that's actually where it went. That's the price that heating oil went to in 2008 when oil prices spiked. How many jobs were taken out of the state by that exported money? Just in Maine, almost 34,000 jobs were lost because of the money that was leaving the state. And in the entire Northeast, 350,000 jobs are destroyed by our dependence on heating oil. It's a huge economic vulnerability that, and when we begin to talk about job destruction, we start to get the attention of the politicians and the policymakers. This is the language that they need to hear. They can understand job destruction. Some politicians are very friendly to sustainable issues and renewable energy issues, but some are strictly, are we going to make money or lose money? Are we going to create jobs and lose jobs? This gets the message through very clearly. So if you happen to live in New England and you do buy heating oil, where does your money go? Well, perhaps 78% just goes to someplace else in the U.S. Okay, at least we're still supporting the U.S. economy. But it doesn't. Most of the heating oil used in the Northeast, and this is this blue line, which is somewhere close to 90%, is refined in the Gulf of Mexico refineries. That's in the southern United States, Louisiana. And a small proportion of that oil that's refined in those Gulf refineries comes from oil wells in the Gulf of Mexico that are part of the U.S. business. But most of the oil that's refined in the Gulf states comes from elsewhere. Some comes from Mexico, and about 60% of the imports are from OPEC. And of those 60%, about half is either Venezuela or Saudi Arabia. And the rest comes from a variety of other countries, mostly in Africa. So once again, we see that we are dependent on a supply chain that's very vulnerable to disruption, to instability, just to the ability of bringing ships across the Atlantic. And in some cases, one might say, we're also exporting our money into regimes that may or may not be so supportive of our own region. Okay, let me shift gears just slightly. This chart shows you the forested regions of the U.S., percentage of forest in each state. And I'm going to focus on the southeast. You can see the green piece of this pie is very large in the southeast. And in Maine, you can see it's mostly a green slice. It turns out that Maine is the most forested state in the U.S. So the bioenergy business in the United States, there is some bioenergy business in the western states as well. And of course, here's Minnesota. But the forest resources, by and large, the states with the most forest resources are the southeast and Maine. This chart shows you just sort of a forest density relationship with the different states, so you can see where the heavily forested areas are. Darker greens are more dense. This is our area. Maine has an annual harvest of wood that's between 16 and 17 million tons per year. That's U.S. tons, short tons, not metric tons. And that has been, I'll show you a chart later in this presentation, that's been a stable level of harvest for many, many years. The growth to harvest ratio in Maine, that is, how quickly the trees are growing versus how quickly the trees are being harvested, is about 1.2, which means the forest is growing faster than it's being removed. So we mentioned about increasing our forest stocks, which increase our carbon stock. In Maine, that's happening. So most of Maine's forests also are certified by globally recognized certification agencies, SFI, Sustainable Forestry Initiative, or FSC, the two big certifying agencies. Most of Maine's forests are certified as sustainable. That means that our wood can be harvested and exported into Europe, perhaps as energy fuel, and qualify as a low-carbon or carbon-neutral combustion source, because it's coming from a sustainably managed forest. Some regions of the world that may, in fact, provide fuel for, say, co-firing in European coal plants with pellets, have a little more difficulty with the chain of custody on sustainability. And if one is to say that the motive of bringing wood pellets into European power plants to lower carbon emissions, if that's the motive, then the wood has to come from a sustainable source. If you're depleting the forest to provide this wood, that's the same as depleting the oil reserves or depleting any other depleting resource. It's not sustainable. It's not a strategy for war in the long term. So one has to have sustainable forestry to make this work. And we firmly believe that and we support that. This chart shows you the percent of timberland by state. In Maine, it's almost 90% forest. It's a big empty state, a lot of trees, and not very many people. I live in a place in Maine called, well, it doesn't even have a name. It's unorganized. And we have a name, we do have a name. We're called Albany Township. And that's just because it's a block of land. And we're approximately 100 square miles. I don't know how many square kilometers it is. Maybe 160? Guessing? I don't know. And 100 voters. So it's very big. But you can see the next two most forested states, well, the next is New Hampshire, and West Virginia, and Vermont. So New Hampshire and Vermont, the three states that go across the the top of New England against the Canadian border, are the most heavily forested states in the country. And it has a percent of land mass. There's some big states out west that have more land. So let's talk a little bit about environmental and economic consequences. And I don't want to presume to be educating this audience on some of these facts, because I think it's very clear to me that people in Sweden and people in Europe in general, at least some of the nations, are very well educated, understanding the economic and environmental benefits, if you will, sustainable, renewable bioenergy. I emphasize sustainable, it's very important. But let me go over a few points because I think it's important to make this case. And the reason what I'm going to make, the case I'm going to make on economic consequences is kind of an order of how, at least we believe, the best use of wood fuel is, and perhaps the least best use as well. We're going to work our way through that. There can be negative consequences as well. Environmental consequences, of course, begin with how the forests are managed. Are the forests managed responsibly? And that's not just environmental, it's ecological. It's a broader scope. So it's not just are we sustaining our forest resource properly, but also are we providing good habitat for wildlife, for people that like to hike or hunt, and that sort of thing. That's all has to be part of the discussion, absolutely. And one of the other things we have to always talk about is other demands on the forest resources, lumber and pulp and paper. Okay. So here's a sort of a representative table of just direct and indirect consequences just from making wood chips. Right? And this is 1,000 tons a year of wood chips. And these numbers can vary depending on technology and where you are and what type of land. But approximately 32 jobs for 100,000 tons per year of wood chips are created. And then you have what I call indirect and induced jobs, right? That because the money that these loggers and truckers are spending on fuel and hardware and going to restaurants and taking care of their families, that stays in the economy and creates other jobs. So altogether, with the multiplier effects, you have around 65 or 66 jobs created from the production of 100,000 wood chips, 100,000 tons of wood chips per year. This is a job creation. And this is one piece of the economic benefit. The other piece I've already alluded to, and that is that the money that's spent on heating and energy no longer is exported. So that's the second benefit. The compounding of those two creates very strong job benefit numbers. My business, Future Metrics, does a lot of work in quantifying this for projects in the Northeast, showing how they're going to create jobs, not destroy jobs. I will tell you that we often come against these interests that have a business stake and not seeing their business displaced. And that business is usually the oil dealers of the Northeast. The oil dealers associations find us a threat because they think we're going to take away their customer. And it's true, perhaps, but our point of view is they should embrace this and make them their customer, not our customer. And so a lot of the work we do with main energy systems is to try to bring the oil, the people whose tradition has been to provide heating oil for homes, into the idea of providing wood pellet fuel also. So that they don't lose a customer, they just change the energy source that their customer uses. And some of the oil dealers get it. We have partnerships now with some. Some, however, tell us to our face, we're going to crush you. You're not very friendly. Okay, here's another one of those charts that's just going to boggle you with numbers, so don't try to interpret this. But essentially what I'm doing here is looking at the cost of energy by various sources. Electricity, this is just electricity. And the cheapest electricity, this is of course in the United States. The far right column is the important piece. The cheapest electricity is hydro. It's green and renewable and low cost. But if you work your way down the hierarchy, here we have biomass, electricity, just making electricity from wood fuel. Not waste, by the way, I'm talking about not municipal solid waste, just This is relatively low-grade wood fuel, so it's not very expensive fuel, but it creates relatively expensive electricity versus natural gas, coal, even land-based wind is less expensive, and even nuclear is a little less expensive than biomass electricity. This is, of course, based on the wood costs in the United States. Why is it? Well, making electricity is not very efficient, right? A biomass electricity plant on a good day might be 25% efficient. There are tremendous losses just inherent in electricity generation. The way electricity is generated using the cooling towers, convention cooling and all that, we didn't get into technical details. But some 75% of the energy in the wood is lost, or it even gets out of the generator, not counting line losses and other issues. So you're taking this valuable resource. I think of wood sometimes as a wonderful storage battery. It's the original solar storage system. It's creating energy from solar, and it takes time. So here we have this wonderful battery that's worked to store solar energy for all these years. Why throw away 75% of that energy if you don't have it? That's why I'm a very big advocate of combined heat and power. If you now take this wonderful fuel and not only generate electricity, but have a good heat demand for that heat that you're throwing away, then, depending on the match, you might have 50%, 60%, even 80%. We have one project we're working on in the United States with a food manufacturing plant that has a very good heat demand year-round, and we're almost 80% efficient with that combined heat and power plant. Now you're only losing 20% of the energy in the fuel. There's even a better efficiency, right? And it's direct thermal heating for homes, business. That's converting the wood just to heat. Now we can talk 90% efficiency on a good modern boiler system. Now you're only losing 10% of that energy. To me, that's the best use. And that should be the first priority, is the best use of the fuel, which I think is direct thermal heating. So that leads me to talk about one of the other companies that I work with. I'm one of the founders of this company. It's called Maine Energy Systems. And we originally, our very first business partner included gunfire, Swedish pellet burner manufacturer. We still have gunfire burners, and we just finished developing a new boiler that uses that burner. It's going through testing in the United States so that we can install it in the plant. But our primary product right now is an Austrian system made by Urquhart. And we are importing the components for that system and assembling them in the United States and Maine, putting them into people's homes. And then this is our first generation delivery truck. We've had 3 of these. And since we've actually upgraded our delivery system, we now use a fully pressurized truck body made by an outfit from Austria called Chopra. Very efficient delivery. We can now deliver a ton every 4 minutes from that truck. So fill up a typical home might take 15 minutes or 20 minutes. Very efficient delivery system. This one had a mechanical belt drive inside, plus the pneumatic for rolling the pellets in, but it was much slower. If you pushed it too hard, what came out the other end of the sawdust had to be done. The new pneumatic system is very efficient. So I have a small movie here with sound. That sounded a minute ago.
Until these kids' childhood dreams can't come true, Cornish School Principal Mary Braga has big plans for them.
We have high expectations for our kids, so we want students that are overall really good, solid achievers and problem solvers.
That means her school has to excel at every level. Top-notch teachers, classes, equipment, and supplies. Not easy when there's barely enough money to make ends meet.
We're a small school, so the budget is very tight.
One item they never need to worry about again, heat, generated from a renewable source.
We have saved, it's a little more than half the cost of last year's heating bill. It's huge.
The school switched from an oil heater to Maine Energy Systems Ergofan wood pellet boiler.
It's more efficient. You're leaving less of a carbon footprint, so it is really good for the environment. And it's something we're teaching kids. So we're living what we teach. You will cut your energy bills down almost in half.
Those extra dollars are funneled right back into the corner school classroom, straight to the students.
We have more money to put into things like books and technology and field trips, things that really have to do with student learning.
Wood pellet boilers are new technology for Americans, but Europeans have been heating their buildings this way for 20 years.
In the European consciousness, there's a deep understanding of fuel shortage and of expensive fuel. We haven't yet gotten there. The boilers are extraordinarily automatic. They are self-feeding. They are self-cleaning. You need to attend to the ash about once every 4,000 or 5,000 pounds of pellets you burn. That's a process that takes literally 2 or 3 minutes, and you'd be happy to do in your cleanest clothes.
And if a technical issue arises, Maine Energy Systems has trained technicians who are available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Senior engineer Dan Wheeler trains all.
We run training classes once a month, anywhere from 8 to 15 people per class. Special trainings are available if necessary. We also offer a second tier, more technical training that is mostly geared toward stage or cascade systems of the auto pellet.
Cascade systems can be used to replace up to 2 million BTUs of expensive oil and propane. Partial heat solutions can provide over 90% of the savings for a fraction of the full system replacement costs. Towns all over New England are catching on. Peterborough, New Hampshire, East Station, the Greenfield, Massachusetts Municipal Building, in Maine, the Gardner Public Works Garage, Bucksport Wastewater Treatment Plant, and Gould Academy, to name a few. It all begins with the pellet, a highly refined, energy-rich nugget of compressed sawdust, automatically transported from a storage bin to a day hub. The Ergofan boiler, licensed by Maine Energy Systems in Bethel, Maine, feeds itself the exact number of pellets needed for an institution's desired temperature. Simple to heat and operate. But the biggest benefits promise an even greater impact.
If 17 to 18% of the homes in our region, the Northeast, convert to pellet fuel, it'll create about 140,000 new permanent jobs. It's big. It's real big.
If you got oil, you need to do something else, period, because the price of oil is going to eat you alive over the next decade.
Maine Energy Systems founder Les Otten believes his locally produced wood pellet fuel systems are key to taking back the economy.
When we build capital goods, we create an economy. And right now, Maine, New England, the Northeast, the United States could do a wonderful thing for itself by reinventing the way it distributed, used, produced, consumed energy.
Otten is putting his money where his mouth is. He and his team created the Northeast Affordable Heat Program, guaranteeing the first 1,000 new customers their wood pellet heat at a price equivalent of $1.99 per gallon of fuel oil for 3 years.
We're willing to take the risk because we understand the market. We'll keep money in the United States. We'll create jobs. It's time to become the masters of our own destiny.
A destiny that begins with the next generation.
We're happy, we're warm, we're comfortable, and our students come first. Maine Energy Systems has been great to work with.
Okay. Oh, here we go. How am I doing on time? 512 hurry here. Let me go through a few slides here and just talk about emissions, because emissions are so important. This slide talks about particulate emissions, that is the aerosols we're hearing about that are creating blockages of cooling in the world, but they also create problems for people breathing, and they create smoke. Right? This is really the smoke. The big black ball at the top is a fireplace. If a home uses 1,000 gallons of heating oil per year, the equivalent energy that they would get if they used to get that equivalent energy from a fireplace would emit almost 2 tons of particulate every year. Here is a pellet boiler, about 3 pounds per year. Here is an oil boiler, about 2.5 pounds per year. Almost as clean, and basically it has clean. This is very dirty. And wood stoves are also very dirty. Even a pellet stove is not so clean. We really think that high quality combustion is important. And here to put it in perspective, we have a measurement called a cord in the United States. I don't know if you know what a cord of wood is. A cord of wood, it's about 1,800 kilos. It's a volume. A homeowner that burns 1 cord of wood in their fireplace will emit 375 pounds of particulate. In the equivalent amount of pellets in a boiler, about 1/3 of a pound. It's hugely different. So this is a very inefficient and very dirty method of using wood fuel. And as far as CO2, if you do a complete life cycle analysis, here's heating oil, typical home, about 15 tons per year of CO2 from their heating oil consumption, versus about 2 tons, 4,000 pounds, from pellet fuel. Now, the combustion part of the pellet fuel we consider basically carbon neutral, actually carbon positive, or carbon negative. It's actually a sequestration that occurs. But if you do a complete life cycle analysis, you have to count the diesel fuel that's used in the harvesting and the logging and transportation. So there is some carbon emitted getting the pellets to the end user. Right? I'll go through these quickly because this is combined heat and power. And this slide you can skip. This is a typical system. And some emission characteristics, but one thing I'd like to point out is this particular system is about 65,000 tons per year, and by the way, these are metric tons. Sorry to keep switching. This is 65,000 metric tons a year, and the total particulate emission is less than 1 fireplace. That's how clean 65,000 tons per year properly converts to energy. Okay? In the last 2 slides, and I was going to talk a little bit about carbon emissions. The full presentation we'll show later. This is another use of the wood resource that we think is going to have good, strong impact for our region, as well as the Southeast. It's pellet exports to Europe. And as many of you know, it's a hot resource. There's a huge demand by European power plants in some countries for wood pellets, co-fired with coal to reduce carbon. And there's insufficient supply in Europe to meet that demand. So pellets are being imported from many places, in the U.S. and more. And this particular chart shows you the main export areas. The Southeast, from these 3 ports, the Southeast are heading to Europe. Some big pellet production also from out of the Gulf states too. There's a couple of large projects in this area that produce pellets. Several of those projects are fully financed by the European utilities. So the European utilities are paying to build these pellet making plants and bring the wood in. But this area also is prime. I'm working on a project that's coming out of this port, called Eastport, that's going to produce approximately 320,000 metric tons a year of pellets and put them on a ship and send them to Europe. And by the way, that plant is going to have a combined heat and power plant with it. It's going to produce its own heat and electricity, because electricity is very expensive. And finally, I'll go very quickly, and I'll just pass through these. There's a lot of, some of you know, controversy in the United States over, unfortunately, and foolishly, is wood burning wood carbon, neutral or low carbon. And I just got an email this morning. There was a huge demonstration in Massachusetts yesterday by anti-biomass people who think that using wood for energy is bad. And this particular website, this is from a website, one of those outfits, they go on to talk about, they have a lot of false information, unfortunately, about health effects and carbon. Particularly, they distort the carbon story. And this picture kind of shows you how. This is their view of biomass carbon emissions versus coal. Now, it's a fact of chemistry that when you burn wood, it releases more carbon than when you burn coal. That's just chemistry. But they don't take into account the fact that the trees are sequestering the carbon that's being released. Now, of course, to make that argument, you have to sustain the forest reserves. You can't be depleting the forest and say, oh yeah, by the way, we're reabsorbing the carbon. You have to have, suppose you have 1 million tons of wood at the beginning of the year. At the end of the year, because of growth, you have 1,050,000 tons of wood. You harvest 50,000 tons. And at the end of the year, you have the same amount of wood you began with. So the stock of both wood and carbon has not been reduced. If you do that, then you can talk legitimately about the carbon cycle and zero carbon. Well, that's the case in most of the United States. But their view of the world does not see this. So my company has done a bunch of simulations, and this is some pictures showing that. And rather than go through these, we'll end this. Just to show you, though, the kind of simulation we use creates feedback loops. And by the way, I have a simulation that includes oceanic carbon, also carbon dioxide absorption from the ocean, which is also important. But for the atmospheric carbon story, using this diagram shows what the sort of basis of the simulation is. And we go through an analysis of coal emissions, no biomass, biomass emissions, and then two cases. Here's business as usual with coal, and here's supplementing some of the electricity demand with biomass. And even though it's not neutral, it's better than business as usual. So it's an important policy to have to do. And what we show here is net carbon from the different fuels. And once again, I'd be happy to share these slides with you guys at any time to talk about this. A couple more quick ones. I know I'm out of time, so I'll be very quick. This is the harvest in Maine for the last 30 years, 1980 to now. And it's essentially been stable. And like I said, the forest in Maine is actually growing as it's being harvested. And these are harvesting trends. The actual number of tons per acre is decreasing now because of better silviculture, that is better forest management. We're getting higher yields per acre. So not only are we doing a better job of managing the forest, we're doing a better job of creating product from the acreage that's there in a sustainable fashion. Okay? Finally, I always like to show this slide. This is European renewable energy. And everybody gets all excited about solar energy and wind power. But solar energy is 1.6% of European renewables. Wind power is about 7.5%. Biomass, almost 67%. The real workhorse of renewable energy is biomass. And we have to continually remind our policymakers of this. And have this. Education of policymakers is key. I sometimes say triple E. It's economically, environmentally, and ecologically a good idea. And I'll stop there.